Okay, so this is a totally spontaneous and unplanned video, um, but I think it's very important because it's about the issue of miscarriage of justice. And I want to talk about a particularly notorious case here in the UK, arguably the most notorious of all time. Um, Basically, I've been looking into David Waddington, the former Home Secretary who passed away yesterday, and apparently he was the defence counsel in the trial of Stefan Kiszko. So I just want to talk a little bit about this case and why it is so important that in legal proceedings, especially around particularly emotive crimes, that all the evidence is presented and that there cannot be any room for mistakes. So in 1975, a young girl, 11 years old, Leslie Molseed from Rochdale, had went out to get groceries for her parents, and she was murdered in a secluded back lane. Um, by the way, I'm going to lay out the very basics of this case if people want to look further into it. There's a lot of resources online. Stefan Ivan Kichko, a 23-year-old local tax clerk of Ukrainian Slovenian parentage, served 16 years in prison after he was wrongfully convicted of her sexual assault and murder. His ordeal was described by one MP as the worst miscarriage of justice of all time. Kichko was released in 1992 after forensic evidence showed that he could not have committed the murder. He died in December 1993. Ronald Castree of Lancashire was found guilty of the crime on the 12th of November 2007. I'm not going to talk about this crime in all its details, but what what this young man went through is appalling. Apparently, within prison, he was bitterly detested by the majority of inmates. This is characteristic of particularly notorious crimes, especially involving um, child abuse and sex offences. And he was attacked several times in prison in 1976 at Wakefield Prison, 1977, 1978, 1981. In March 1981, he was involved in a fight with another prisoner. You can read that as self-defense. When he was again punched in the face in an unprovoked attack, but this time he retaliated and fought back, and the two had to be separated. Both men were given a loss of privileges for 28 days. On each occasion, this is according to Wikipedia, the attacks on Kitchko earned him little sympathy among either other prisoners or guards because of the crime for which he had been jailed. Apparently, during this time, his mother was very loyal to him. She pushed hard for justice, but was ignored by the governments of Callaghan and Thatcher. And it says that he was not physically attacked or threatened again during his remaining 11 years in prison. During that time, he was often in the hospital wing of prisons. When he was not there, he was placed among less violent offenders. So basically, I mean, you can't really talk basically in these situations, but the police were guilty of incredible misconduct in this case. And I think it is characteristic of a lot of particularly notorious crimes. The police are under pressure to apprehend someone, and we shouldn't assume that because we live in a democracy, the police are not above putting undue pressure on sometimes vulnerable people who perhaps have mental health issues, who don't entirely know what they're doing, what they're saying, what their legal rights are. So, like I say, David Waddington was then his defence counsel, and his defence counsel were accused of acting in a way that wasn't entirely helpful to the client. And according to the Wikipedia article on Lord Waddington, it says that um, it is alleged that his defence team made significant mistakes. First, they did not seek an adjournment when the Crown delivered thousands of pages of additional unused material on the first morning of the trial. Waddington recalled the unused material did not include the results of tests on Mr. Kitchko's semen, which were then in the hands of the police and showed that Mr. Kiszko was not the murderer. This is staggering. So at the beginning of the trial, or early in the case, 1976, this would have been vital evidence proving his innocence. And what you had was an innocent man jailed for 16 years for a crime he did not commit. And not any crime, a particularly emotive crime, one that inevitably put him at risk from other inmates. That's why I think we need to be very, very, very careful and thorough, especially with sex crimes, with crimes involving children and so on. Firstly, those are despicable crimes, and we shouldn't forget the family of Desi Molseed. But Stefan Kiszko was a victim as well. And these cases are not pandemic. They're not like, I wouldn't say they're very common. But for me, it is a strong reason why we should not bring back the death penalty. I've no doubt in the mid 70s there would have been thousands of people demanding his blood. And what would have happened? We would have had the execution of an innocent man. Now, some would say that would be not as bad as what he went through. But he died just a year after his release. I mean, his life was totally ruined. And this should never happen again. I'm not saying this is the only case, there have been other cases. But wherever there is significant doubt, wherever there is a miscarriage of justice, there has to be an avenue. And I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is appeals courts and so on. My knowledge of the legal system really isn't up to scratch. But it's not just a miscarriage of justice. It's the fact that you had the disgraceful situation where guards didn't care. There's a lot going on now about the way prisons are out of control. I think one thing that I feel very strongly about is no matter what crime an inmate is charged with, it is a responsibility for prison guards to maintain discipline. And this is why I feel very strongly about, sometimes people say, especially in particularly emotive cases, oh, let other inmates deal with them. I really don't like that. I really don't feel comfortable with that. That's not to say that everyone accused of serious crimes or being incarcerated for serious crimes are innocent. Certainly not. Most of them probably are guilty of the crime that they have been convicted. But when I think of what this young man went through, to not only be serving a custodial sentence for something he didn't do, but to be vilified, to be attacked, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine the sheer nightmare he and his family would have went through. And everyone involved in that should be thoroughly ashamed of themselves. Those police officers, I don't know how they sleep at night. As for Ronald Castry, he's a piece of shit. He's the man who actually done it. He would have known that an innocent man was in prison. He brutally murdered a defenseless young girl, and then he saw an innocent man go to prison for it. But anyway, back to the point I was making, this is why I really don't believe in allowing a situation where inmates take over no matter how they motive the crime. And I had a debate about this recently. I consider myself conservative on crime, but I also am a passionate believer that miscarriages of justice must be taken seriously. The United States has plenty of examples. And this is not an isolated case in this country. It might be the most notorious case, but it's not isolated. So I really do believe that when you have particularly sensitive crimes, you cannot allow a situation where other inmates brutalize that inmate. And if they're guilty, well, they should absolutely serve their time. They should be punished. But you cannot allow a situation where inmates run prisons. I think one of the biggest issues right now, it is overcrowding, but it is also a shortage in prison staff. I don't think prison itself is the problem. It's the overcrowding and the shortage in prison staff. Anyway, I'll round this up. This has only been touching on this case, but if you're interested, it's disturbing. This should never have happened. I mean, it's been 24 years since Stefan Kiszko passed away. It's been 42 years since the crime itself. So this is getting further back in time now, but it should never have happened. Um, Let me know your thoughts on miscarriages of justice and this issue in general. I really feel strongly that it's also a disgrace that no police officer was ever convicted of any sort of wrongdoing. And I think it's a classic case of the police protecting themselves. And it's an utter disgrace.